The shadow of the Tomb Raider is upon us. A longtime series fan, my feelings towards Crystal's 2013 reboot and its sequel, Rise of the Tomb Raider, were mixed. While the news of a third game in this reboot line was guaranteed, my anticipation of its inevitable arrival remained tame. Nevertheless, my curiosity did peak upon Shadow's reveal, even if my enthusiasm didn't. So, given the information we have about young Laura's next adventure, here are the curmudgeonly musings of an old-timer approaching the next game with a cautious pessimism. One of the reasons I find myself unable to muster much interest towards Shadow is the story. Obviously, story isn't everything, and I was able to push through and enjoy the gameplay of Reboot and Rise, reserving sighs for the melodramatic cutscenes and unfathomably violent chains of explosions Laura seemingly found trailing her every step. I have no qualms about the choice to explore Laura's origins, nor make the game more about interaction than solitude. Where my interest began to wane was in the method of storytelling and the chosen genre, young adult. Now, I can concede that this story was not written for my generation, and that's fine. What I wrestle with is just how disrespectfully the broader universe has been approached. With little in the way of introduction or explanation, the storytelling is erratic at best. Emotional attachment is demanded, not earned, leading to an unintentional comedic effect as Laura is continually pounded and bounced about her environment. Nothing happens quietly in this new series, making it hard to take anything seriously. This disregard traveled beyond the screen, infecting the comic series and novel too. With authors having little chance to collaborate regarding the overarching narrative, what we got was an inconsistent and confusing portrayal of young Laura prior to the reboot and in between it and Rise. Rhianna Pratchett, the writer for the reboot and Rise, as well as some of the comic series, has gone on record to voice some of the challenges she faced while writing for game companies. Things like the game being more or less outlined before the story bits were added, leading to inconsistent pacing between reveals, information, and gameplay. Regardless of what I think of Pratchett's work on the story, I can understand how challenging it must have been to jam a story into a game rather than having it built alongside the gameplay. While the gameplay of Reboot and Rise were well-paced, introducing new elements and challenges at a digestible pace, the story was not given the same respect, starting with the volume at 10 and never turning down. Shadow will not have Pratchett on board as writer, and as we have found out, nor will it be a Crystal Dynamics game. While 2014's Thief, a collaboration between Pratchett and Montreal, wasn't incredibly well received, Pratchett again gave some insight, stating she was brought into the project quite late and did not feel it was her best work. Again, taking this into account, along with pressure from the publisher, we can still assume things may be looking up for the story in Shadow, regardless of writers involved. Both Human Revolution and Mankind Divided had great, interesting storylines. Obviously, Montreal knows how to tell a story, as do Crystal Dynamics and Pratchett, looking at their production's pre-Tomb Raider reboot. Assuming the pressure from above hasn't taken a negative toll on Shadow's story and game design production, with more pre-production cooperation between writing and design staff, this change-up could signal good things to come. The balance between cinematics and audio logs, for example. Diary inclusions wavered between adding to the immersion, with some highlighting an area's history and aiding in world-building, while others felt completely out of place, a la Anna and Constantine carelessly peppering the environments with audio logs revealing their deepest, darkest secrets. Again, the writers may or may not be to blame for this. So, what we have is a change-up to the writing and design crew, and hopefully the allotment of a new approach from Square above them. This is the end of what will be coined the Reboot Trilogy, and whether or not a change this late in the game is possible will have to be seen. This shakeup is promising, but changing the talent will only yield results if the storytelling methodology changes as well. Tomb Raider became a phenomenon due to both its character and gameplay. Laura was nimble, capable of overcoming any challenge the game threw at her, be it combative, cognitive, or acrobatic. Her abilities were built around her environment, and her environments were built around her abilities. Thus, despite the original engine's blocky setup, the games were incredibly immersive because players could read and interpret them in relation to Laura's capabilities. They were balanced, well-designed circuits that encouraged experimentation. Nowadays, Tomb Raider is less open, more or less relying on predetermined points of interaction. However, though considerably more artificial feeling, Reboot and Rise still maintained a glimmer of that openness. Tomb Raider is hardly the trendsetter it used to be. It's more the culmination of popular adventure and third-person shooter trends, mixing together light stealth, cover shooting, crafting, and straightforward linear platforming. Though not my cup of tea, all the genres and traits pulled together were done so with care and expertise. Vanilla as it may have been, one could hardly criticize the game engine's diverse functionality. Ironically, I felt nowhere was the power of the Crystal Engine's traversal, construction, and combat mechanics more inspired than the areas worked on by Montreal. Starting with the reboot, Montreal was tasked with developing a competitive multiplayer mode for the game. While the main campaign had Laura killing plenty, the AI was notably static and the combat was more situational. Multiplayer, which had only been implemented a handful of times in series history, seemed at odds with what had been billed as a narrative-focused single-player adventure. However, first and foremost, Tomb Raider was now an action game, gone were the puzzles aside from a few laughably simple roadblocks in the main campaign. Gone was the emphasis on exploration, replaced by scavenger hunts for meaningless collectibles. Now, again against series tradition, the focus was on combat. Tomb Raider Reboot may not have done anything revolutionary with its combat, but it was the culmination of the third-person shooter genre's best aspects, perfectly executed at the tail end of a generation that would be known for its third-person shooters. The best display of Tomb Raider Reboot's combat? Montreal's multiplayer mode. While the modes of play and leveling system were more or less textbook for a multiplayer shooter, the traversal system and map design made matches into exciting, multi-level battles. Players could drop mines, set traps, maneuver up scalable walls, and destroy barriers. Melee combat was deeper than your standard rifle butt, demanding setup and timing to close in for the kill. Maps catered to this frantic combat incredibly well, demanding the mastery of a whole arsenal as opposed to a single weapon for success. Unfortunately, despite my and several dozen others' enthusiasm, competitive multiplayer was not to be included in the second game. However, Montreal was to return for work and Rise via the game's secret challenge tombs. The challenge tomb idea was great, and it worked really well in The Guardian of Light. In Reboot, the puzzle rooms were a bit too easy, likely watered down to appeal to the game's broader audience. In Rise, this changed with challenge tombs becoming far more intricate, feeling as though they were an actual part of the environment. Some felt like levels unto themselves, making the world richer not only through the reward of artifacts, but via the trials it took to obtain them. These moments, alone with Laura navigating a series of barriers, felt like classic Tomb Raider. There are the parts of Rise I remember most fondly, and I would have been content had the entire game maintained this slower pace, mixing in exploration and combat in more sparing intervals. Now, I realize these two aspects are somewhat at odds with one another. I praise the dynamic combat of the first game's multiplayer and the slower, more methodical exploration of the second game's puzzles. Which would I prefer Montreal focused on for Shadow? Probably puzzles and challenge tombs, but I think there's still space for combat. Combat had been an area Tomb Raider struggled with right up until the reboot. Core's games were more about the spectacle and acrobatics of combat, later mixing in some situational sniping bits. Crystal's first few takes attempted to deepen this lock-on style combat, but never quite made it strong enough to stand out. Reboot's adoption of over-the-shoulder combat was a change of pace, but considering the game changed the focus from puzzles and exploration towards combat, it's hard to argue it didn't succeed at building a balanced game off of those foundations. I expect Shadow to continue this focus on combat and light stealth. What I would like to see is a remolding into more of an arena shooter, a la Doom for example. Put Laura into different arenas and make the game focused on pure hard-hitting combat. Make her the unstoppable, unforgiving war machine we know, pulling inspiration from the map designs of Reboot's multiplayer, allowing the AI to be a bit more unpredictable and mobile. As for puzzles and level layout, there's nothing wrong with an open-concept Tomb Raider. However, there's also nothing wrong with linear. Tomb Raider did it for years, and immersion never suffered. Of course, all this is just a fan spitballing. Crystal Dynamics is an incredibly talented team, as is Montreal. Deus Ex Human Revolution is hands down one of the best games of last generation, and the best of Eidos' productions post-Square takeover, so there is reason to be excited for Shadow. However, it's ultimately what the suits say up top that goes, thus I maintain my pessimism that this game may just be more of the same, and it may just not be for me. However, if they do decide to radically change the game's dynamics and focus, I think there is still room for longtime fans like myself to join the hype. Have the story live up to its potential, or maybe just quiet it down a bit, sneaking it into the background. Focus on the engine's strengths, namely dynamic and not cover-based combat. Build a world of mystery through contemplation and slow reveal through exploration and puzzles, not through awkward diary placements, conspicuously placed red barrels, or fetch quests that don't really make sense in the context of such circumstances. What do you think of the Reboot series? Do you think Montreal will usher in major changes? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.